Greetings, colleagues, academics, and distinguished guests. My name is Ndwandwe. I'm a professional town planner with the city of Umhlatuze in Richards Bay, KwaZulu-Natal, North Coast in South Africa. I'm also a student with the University of Johannesburg. Today, I'm presenting to you a paper on examining prospects of stakeholders' integration in rural infrastructure investment interventions to aid sustainable rural livelihoods, which is a paper I co-authored with Prof. Gumbo. In terms of the setting the scene, this paper looked at inadequate infrastructure to facilitate sustainable rural livelihoods as a result of colonial and apartheid entrenched spatial form. Obviously, there are prevailing socio-economic challenges that cannot be divorced from lack of infrastructure investment, particularly in rural communities of South Africa, where there are segregation laws and policies that sought to isolate and marginalize native peoples through the Native Land Act of 1913. And in the democratic era, we now have rural municipalities in these areas that were created through the 1913 Native Land Act that often struggle to coordinate service delivery in an effective and efficient manner, let alone have enough investment capability to transform or facilitate economic development in rural communities. So the paper then looked into the regional development interventions on whether or not they are able to aid rural infrastructure investment for previously marginalized communities, particularly in relation to integration. But of particular interest was the identification of the fact that there is a continued bias to the urban development agenda with a continued drive towards creation of new cities and smart cities as part of the urban growth management agenda, while in contrast there is still a known fact or a proven fact that the rural communities remain the epicenter of poverty and socioeconomic disparities. So while that is noted, then the question rises that why isn't there enough emphasis on regional development to support rural institutions or rural municipalities that often struggle to facilitate transformation and sustainability of the rural economies. So obviously then the paper contends that rural communities remain an area of innovation and where more can be done to transform them to be economically viable. So when we look at in rural infrastructure in particular, so the focus there is on provision of adequate infrastructure, such as telecommunication infrastructure, transport infrastructure for road and rail network in order for the transportation of goods that get produced in the rural communities to the identified target market, access to basic services such as water, electricity, sanitation, and waste management. So then with that being noted, so it has become evident that rural communities are still marginalized. While the world is moving towards the fourth industrial revolution, already there is a challenge in rural communities who are still struggling with the very basic telecommunication or ICT infrastructure. So then the question that was important to look into, what has been done or is enough being done to see to it that the sustainable development goals in as far as rural communities are concerned are being attained. So in terms of the methodological approach, the paper had key informant interviews as well as a review of resource documents and statutory documents such as the integrated development plans and spatial development frameworks, which are key strategic documents at municipal level, district level, as well as provincial and national level to guide development. So the project-specific reports that relate to farmer production support units were also used, where the study examined the extent to which collaboration in rural infrastructure investment was done and whether or not the planning and implementation of regional development strategies is confined within the administrative boundaries. Of particular note there, the analysis that the study followed was qualitative in nature, where centered around narrative analysis, where data was coded through identification of themes as well as patterns, relationships taken into account, dynamics of multiple stakeholders, as well as scenarios associated with each case that was looked into. So data was scrutinized to identify common words and phrases to make sure that whatever that is done is actually not divorced from the existing body of knowledge, while grounded in the theory of economic development. So the 6 case studies that were looked at were from King Ndwandwe district, as well as Kanyagote district and Zululand district, where all of the 6 cases that were sampled had a primary objective to bring together cooperatives and small-scale farmers according to their varied produce. And then ideally they were supposed to be linked to a particular target market, though little consideration was given to investigating distribution channels on how exactly whatever they produce as cooperatives in the farmer production support units will be taken to that particular market. So obviously, there was one, at least rural urban market in the King Ndwandwe district, though even that one has not been fully operational as a result of lack of proper investigations being done, as well as the economic value chain being carefully researched before government funding is availed. And obviously, the only positive thing to take out of such development or regional development initiatives are those infrastructure investments such as the irrigation infrastructure, the feedlots construction, etc., etc. So, but there was still a lack of proper coordination in as far as getting the produce from these farmers to the appropriate beyond the local market. So obviously the key revelation there being the fact that this was a nationwide initiative that was more of a tick box exercise without being informed by proper policy research to guide this development agenda. Not surprisingly though, the government seems to have abandoned this agri-parks regional development initiative despite it being only introduced in 2015 and now focusing on the district development models. And just before the agri-parks concept, there was also the comprehensive rural development project. So arguably, there is this duplication of plans, policies, and strategies without any data. And as a result, findings suggest that there is no meaningful stakeholders integration for infusion of collective strategy formulation, no is action-based research considering local context and dynamics being prioritized. So municipalities continue to operate as an extension of whatever agenda that national government thriving, and as a result, situation of the ground suggests that there's a continued perpetuation of the tale of two cities, where rural communities continue to be marginalized, while urban areas will continue to develop and be more affluent. So in terms of policy implication, there is still a need for, or there's still a search for comprehensive strategies and transformation for rural space economy. And thus, even the lack of direction in the rollout of agri-hubs is testimony to the lack of policy research that guide development initiatives, where government only avail budgets as part of the political term of office, where there must be development plans that are formulated and implemented and funds being made available, but there is no proper policy research to guide. So basically, the study explores the nexus of explored the nexus of stakeholders integration, and then with the primary focus of exploring alternative institutional arrangements without being fixed to administrative boundaries. Accordingly, then functional regions were identified as a potential solution to prevailing socioeconomic disparities by fragile rural municipalities. So the paper recommends meaningful stakeholders integration through regional collaboration in rural infrastructure interventions to see to it that whatever that is being done, it's based on functionality and without necessarily being fixed to administrative boundaries. So that will be all from me. Thank you very much. I will take any questions and comments, if any. Thank you.